Hello and welcome to this week's Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's current affairs programme. My name is Emma Webb and I'm your host, and this week I'm joined by the director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle, and cultural historian and senior fellow of the New Culture Forum, Philip Kisserly. So this week we have seen in the Times magazine, Shamima Begum has become a cover girl, and we're going to be asking whether or not, as Brendan O'Neill wrote in his Spectator column this week, we have fully fallen through the moral looking glass. We'll also be talking about human composting and gender neutral pronouns for God. Has the Church of England completely lost the plot? And finally, Fawlty Towers is back after UK TV, owned by the BBC, cancelled the famous episode where Fawlty Towers goose steps called The Germans. They've now decided to relaunch it in a new remake that he's going to be doing with his daughter. So let's begin with the story about Shamima Begum. There's been a lot in the news about Begum recently, but primarily this image of her on the front of the Times magazine and this long piece that's been written by the guy who did the 10-part podcast series on her.
Yes, no, it's...
How did you feel looking at that image?
Well, I didn't see the original... I didn't see the paper when it came out on Saturday. I saw it online after. And I just sort of thought, well, how much lower can they go, actually, in a way? Because there are two ways of looking at this. You could say that it is being... deliberately controversial and provocative, or you could actually say it is a cynical move to get the kind of discussion and controversy that means that we're now talking about it. I don't know quite which one is worse, actually. But
they're presenting her as this sort of, she's almost like a Kardashian. She does the interview that she's done, this BBC interview on BBC Two as well, or documentary, a series of interviews that were also, I think they're the same ones that we use for the podcast, because I listened to the podcast too, and there's a lot of overlap. And she sits there with these sunglasses on her head and with her little cap on and everything, and she's obviously being painted to be this kind of almost celebrity figure.
But you then have to sort of say why, right? Why is this happening? Why would they try to rehabilitate her in this way? To me, when you look at the picture of her, for example, there, however much she's dolled up, she's got these dead eyes.
Yeah, she really has.
She's got these dead eyes from when you first saw her, when she was still in the Islamic dress. And I'm tired of hearing what must be the weakest case of victimhood, you can imagine. But you do look and you sort of think, this is the Times, the so-called paper of record, right? It used to be, it hasn't been for a long time, but are much, reviled tabloids, I don't think would do something like this.
No.
What did you think of in the BBC documentary? She argues that, or she claims that before she travelled to join ISIS, that she hadn't seen she didn't know about Alan Henning or anybody else being beheaded because she didn't watch the news, because she was a 15-year-old, even though they were obviously very intelligent girls.
It's a very easy claim to make.
And that she hadn't seen any of the other propaganda videos.
But
is that possible? Do you think she's just lying?
Of course not. I suspect she's told one or two porkies over the years. I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is she was claiming racism as well.
Yes,
that's
right.
That's actually the key thing, isn't it? If you're a victim of racism, then you can do anything.
And I think it was the Metro also said that she was a victim of some kind of Islamophobic onslaught online or something like this.
Yeah, but the whole thing, as Peter says, is just so grotesque. And do you know what it reminds me of? I was just thinking about it. Well, I was reading about it, and I was just coming down on the train today. It reminds me of, I don't know whether viewers will know about this, but there was a case in 1981 in Paris, Izzy Sagawa. Do you remember Izzy Sagawa? He was a Japanese guy who murdered his girlfriend and then ate her. Then became a big celebrity on Japanese TV. And it's almost as though we're cannibalizing our own culture, isn't it? She's been a party to these hideous crimes, and now they are literally making her a celebrity. She's got this this soft focus, this kind of model-esque kind of look. She is the Izzy Sagawa of our times.
And it's not going to work, by the way. Sorry, it's not going to work with most people. They're not that stupid. I mean, I think it is utterly deplorable, and as you
There's
say,
something about it that is really morally bankrupt. Brendan O'Neill made this point that, firstly, if this was a young guy who'd gone to join a Nazi group that had massacred black people, there's no way that the media would be treating him in the way that they're treating her. And that also, he was saying, imagine being a Yazidi woman who has been the victim of these horrible crimes that Begum is complicit in through having gone to join this state building exercise, to then see the Times magazine of all publications plastering her over the front, the BBC, the national broadcaster, giving her this, as you say, I think soft focus, not just in the way that she's portrayed visually, but it's a soft focus interview. So the interviewer pushes back on a few points here and there, but it feels cosmetic. The overall impression you get is that these media outlets are trying to create public favour for her coming back here. To paint her as the victim.
Relativism is just so appalling. So they would say, I think their argument would be, oh, well, she was only 15. It feeds into that thing that you were saying, well, I didn't see the news, I didn't know what was going on, and I was groomed, I was a victim of these things. So they would rob her of agency and responsibility. Yeah. But these are the very same people who would say that 10-year-olds can choose their own gender.
Exactly. Yeah.
That 15-year-olds that can go under the knife and have their breasts sliced off. So in lots of ways it shines a light on the ludicrous nature, the moral vacuum that is not only at the centre of the left, the identitarian left, but the left now being at the centre of the dominant culture. It really shows us up for what we are. It's
also very interesting that we keep hearing all these things about misogyny, but even the government's this push that we're seeing now with the online safety bill towards protecting women from hurty words on the internet, which in itself I think is actually quite misogynistic, because it's presenting, we live in a society that thinks women don't need to be protected physically from men by preserving same-sex spaces or same-sex refuges and things like that, but they do need to be protected psychologically, as if women are somehow particularly fragile. And it's always women and children, as if psychologically women are being sort of infantilized. And I just find that very interesting in the context of what we're seeing around Begum, that she's being painted in a way that no male terrorist, no man who had ever gone to join Islamic State, no matter what he'd done taking part in that state building exercise, he would be called a terrorist, he would be treated as such, he would be rightly vilified. And as you're saying, the narrative around her is that she's being robbed of her agency. At 15, you're a young woman essentially, and her and her friends were clearly intelligent. There's no way on earth that anybody, even if they were living solely on the internet, would not have been aware of other aspects of ISIS's crimes. So a lot of the robbing her of her agency, I think, it's not so much because she's young, it's because she's a woman, because she's viewed as having been, swept up as a sort of female victim in this state building exercise.
It doesn't actually, as you say, work with men. I think there's a similar case, isn't there, on the citizenship front.
Jack Latz.
Yes.
Was also and
who basically was a young man who was actually stripped of citizenship, I think.
He was a dual Canadian citizen.
I think the thing is you say, I mean, it is essentially that it is extraordinary left-wing relativism, plus she's got all the kind of characteristics you need to be a victim, par excellence, and also I think it's a good old-fashioned sort of desire to give the benefit of the doubt to someone who's behaved outrageously towards her own country.
It's what you think it's
that's
also
that's the thing.
It's very self-centered of the Times magazine to do this piece, because they could have chosen. So it's not even that there's a moral equivalence between, in terms of victimhood, between Begum and the actual victims of Islamic State. It's that the actual victims are being completely silenced and ignored. The Times could have chosen to put a Yazidi woman on the front cover of Times magazine, even if they'd made did a story about Begum. But my point is, though, that by choosing to put Begum on the front cover, that's the Times essentially betraying the fact that this is not really about who's the victim here or, you know, anything like that. It's all about how can we make this story about Britain and how Britain is bad and how we are responsible for her crimes and she's not morally responsible for her own actions. And so actually she's our victim rather than a perpetrator in a project that has committed genocide and executed Christians and Yazidis and other Muslim minorities.
That's precisely what it is. That's, you know, she's a victim of our bigotry and our racism, and that's how she's presented, you know. But I think we just need to look at it. Peter's already alluded to it, actually, with the dead eyes. And what she is a classic textbook case of a narcissist, or possibly a sociopath or a psychopath, you know. But that is completely ignored. All the characteristics say that she's a narcissist or a psychopath, and nobody, you know, that isn't dealt with at all. And again, if you were saying, if this was a white working class boy who'd gone off to join something that was right wing, you know, everything that's repulsive to them, they would be feeding all of those things into the narrative.
Also, you know, I think the other thing as well is that, you know, related to that is that the people who they put this together, not so much the BBC, whatever, because they're so arrogant they kind of don't even listen to anyone. With the Times, they will be sort of thinking, oh, this will get the gammons going. You know, you said, oh, this is they see her as sort of their victim. Right? In other words, they will kind of instinctively give her the benefit of the doubt, as I said, but also this will annoy the right people that we can't bear anyway.
It's interesting as well, at the beginning of the BBC documentary, they do this whole sort of thing where it's about poverty in East London against the backdrop of the city, and you painting the kind of poverty and the bleakness of where Begum came from. But as if that in any way, never mind it being an excuse, we can set that aside, that would be a factor in explaining somebody's decision to go and do such a thing is crazy. You don't see, I'm from East London, you don't see the majority of Muslim girls in East London going and making this decision. And so that is, but choosing to put that forward, to portray that as context for what follows, is a way of trying to create, editorially choosing to try and create sympathy for her.
But I mean, they're more frivolous as well, aren't they? So they say, oh well, she was an adolescent. You know, we all make wrong decisions. We don't go to genocidal cults and behead people and torture people. No, you smoke
some pot behind the bike shed.
Yeah, but they're actually, you know, they're actually playing that card. It's, you know, she's an adolescent. Hey, she's an adolescent kid. You know, we all do these. We all go and behead people. You know,
and sure, people do make mistakes when they're an adolescent. People think stupid things. People do historically have joined utopian movements, that kind of thing. She thought she was going to join an Islamic utopia. Sure, but still, regardless, actions have consequences. And when it comes to, because the background of this, of course, is that the government has certain information about this that the public can't possibly know. That's the information on which Sajid Javid originally made the decision to strip her of her citizenship. But we don't have that information. But why should the British public be put potentially in harm's way because of her, because of the consequences of her actions? Why?
Well, mainly actually because there's one rule for one demographic, I think, as we're going to see maybe with the next story in a minute, and there's another rule for another demographic, and it comes back down to relativism. It comes back down to hierarchies of privilege. It's about victimhood. It's about manufactured victimhood, and that's where we are.
Let's tie this in quickly with before moving on to the next subject. The report on from the Prevent Review. It's also in the news this week. And it found that too much, or is said to have found that too much money and time has been diverted away from looking at the main threat, which is still Islamist extremism, into other things like mental health, or looking particularly at incels, which, for anybody who doesn't know what an incel is, that's involuntary celibates, and it relates to misogynistic online forums and things like that.
This is the report, isn't it, being done by William Shawcross into Prevent, which is the government scheme to try to prevent radicalization. That's basically what it was about. It was sort of set up originally in response to Islamic terrorism. I mean, they were quite clear about that, actually. But since then, a lot of water's gone under the bridge. And I think that what this report, which I don't even know, I think it's published today, it's been trailed endlessly, and I think it's been delayed. What it really basically also says is that there was a huge kind of emphasis put instead on the right-wing terrorist threat, right? And I remember that when I was at City Hall. There was this kind of sense, that somehow or other, people, they're trying to equivocate, make comparisons, where I'm not quite sure of the numbers, but isn't it something like, some huge percentage of terrorist threat is without question Islamist. It's something like 90% or something. Yet we still have to kind of go through this role-playing thing, whereby but yes, at the same time, you've got these right-wing possible, in fact, I think I've seen stories saying, the biggest threat now to Britain is from right-wing.
Yeah, there are stories there. There are stories about that.
I'm not saying that there aren't some really appalling people about,
crazy people out there.
But I mean, this is to deny, and what you have to say, well, why actually? It's entirely born of the same instincts as what we've just been discussing.
I mean, but this is one of those stories that really illustrates the danger of this, because this will actually result probably in radicalized people who might not have been radicalized, but aren't doing their job properly. They're looking for the wrong people, and they're looking at the wrong people because of all of these politically correct nonsense things.
Well, one of the other things that this report said to have found is that Home Office funding is actually being used to fund extremist groups because there's a lack of scrutiny into what the groups believe that they're funding.
I mean, they must be laughing like crazy, because if ever the phrase "useful idiot" was used, I mean, it is for these people. The funding is going towards terrorism.
Well, this just shows how counterproductive it is as well, because it found that prevent panels that handle these cases actually included some Muslim groups who oppose the entire existence of prevent as a strategy.
Yes, I mean, the problem with prevent is that it's all we've got right at the moment. So that is what we're having to deal with. But frankly, I don't quite see how the scheme could actually come back after a report as damning as this allegedly is, and perhaps it shouldn't, because I think it's now being used for the wrong things. I think that we've heard examples of teachers, for example, reporting people to prevent things they've said in the classroom, which are, as you say, are rather sort of, arcane things or superficial things, and that's very, very worrying too. But I think the main thing, as you say, is that this kind of, what is the point of it? Is it actually just to say to people, well, yes, there is that threat, but really, actually, these threats are just as bad, so don't kind of get Islamophobic about it.
Doesn't it show how bad things have got? Because everything that we're talking about here has happened under Conservative government. If this was under a Labour government, we'd be saying, all right, well, you kind of expect it. But it's all happened under a Conservative government. That's where we are.
Let's move on to the next subject, which is the Church of England having completely lost the plot. So this week there were two completely insane stories. The first one actually made my stomach churn when I read it, which is this idea of the church, in order to meet their net zero target by 2030, they're considering human composting.
What actually does that mean, even?
It's a more carbon neutral way of disposing of a body than cremating it. I don't know exactly what the process is, but one of the processes that's mentioned in the article on this is the use of water and other things to basically break down the body. But the reason why, human composting in this country is not legal at the moment. And the other option is this water treatment, but that isn't, that there's no law on that, but no a water company will allow anybody who does this to use the sewage because it's putting human remains in the sewage. So anyway, the Church of England were discussing doing this sort of awful sacrilegious act, as far as I'm concerned. In the same week as they've also been discussing changing the liturgy so that it uses gender neutral terms for God. So I presume instead of like our Father who art in heaven, it would be like our parent who art in heaven, or something
Actually,
to that
what
effect.
would it be actually? If it can't be our Father, it wouldn't be our parent, because that again is morally loaded. So what would it be?
They who art in heaven, hallowed be
Yes.
their name.
Yeah.
Or you?
Their
Could they even
kingdom
say
come.
you?
No, their gender neutral kingdom. It's complex, isn't it?
Marcus Walker made a very funny point, which is that we shouldn't be misgendering God because he's been very clear what his pronouns should be, and he prefers to be referred to as he, him.
First
but
of all, what?
referred to as he, him. But don't you think that there's at the sort of core of this, obviously the church in many respects has lost the plot, but on the language point, I mean, they are, in the most fundamental sense, they are trying to deconstruct. Never mind the liturgy; they're deconstructing the very fabric of church doctrine.
I think it's more than that. I think what we see. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's an important point. I think what we're seeing here is religion, the established religion, being superseded by a cult. And the cult is overtaking. It's like a cuckoo in the nest, isn't it? So I was going to say it's like the new religion that everybody's buying into, but it's not actually a religion, it's a cult. It's extreme. And the reason I'm saying this is because I had an experience last week that really brought it home to me. We talk about this all the time, don't we? We make a living out of talking about culture and politics and stuff like that. But every now and again, we kind of go into the real world. I went into a school last week to do a debating matters thing. And I'd not been into school for a very long time. I used to take students into school, but now schools are really like indoctrination camps. One of the things I saw was a great big Soviet-style mural dedicated to BLM. Really? And another one, again, a big mural dedicated to the NHS. So it's this cult that is inculcated. Yes, inculcated into children, and then you just see it taking over.
Do you think that the human composting story, and this has obviously come out of the church's synod, the meeting where they discuss church policies and so on, and this was raised asking, what does the church think about this? The fact that this is on the radar of the church as a potential option, that they would privilege net zero over the treatment of the dead, even the way that it was referred to was disposing of a body, that there's something so sacrilegious and defiling about that way of treating a human being's body after death, because the church traditionally believes in physical resurrection, which is one of the reasons why lots of Christians don't want to be cremated, because they believe that your physical flesh will be resurrected in the end times when that Christ comes again. So the idea that you would dispose of a body in this gruesome way, basically sending its sludge into the sewers, is almost, I mean, it's almost pagan. There's something about it that is defiling in the deepest sense, and it's defiling to church doctrine, but it's defiling to the sort of idea of the sanctity of the human being, and its body should be treated with respect.
Or the individual. It's destroying the individual, the notion that the individual is important.
The individual is being subjected to net zero as a target.
They don't believe it anymore. It's as simple as that. I mean, all of this comes from just simply not believing it anymore. When you say they've lost the plot, I'm not getting at you semantically for it, but when people say this, it sounds not exactly charming, but it sounds like crazy people. No,
What they like.
Well, no, it might be actually much more than that. They actually don't believe. I mean, I've always been very, very struck by the fact that the church never seems to complain about the fact that attendances are so low.
Yeah.
Everyone else does. They always note it. They never.
I don't remember that coming out of the synod discussions.
No,
Maybe it came up, but it wasn't
it's
reported
like they
on.
don't mind. You know,
It's almost like they're well, it's not almost. They're apologetic for Christianity, aren't they?
or
You know,
possibly maybe some of them
I
don't
would-
actually even believe.
No, I
in
don't
any of
think
it
they
at
do.
all. I mean,
don't
the
think
fact
they
is, it's gone. I mean,
Yeah.
the Church of England is gone. In some ways, we've got the coronation coming up, haven't we? In some ways, you know, that could be pregnant with meaning, couldn't it? I mean, if you were going to really reflect on the reality of the situation, you could say, well, it's about time maybe when it should no longer be the established church or whatever.
Now the problem is, though, we've discussed this on this show before, that if you disestablish the church, you also undermine the monarchy, and then the whole constitutional, the
whole
fabric
thing
unravels.
Yeah.
But I
They're doing a very good job of that themselves, aren't they?
there's something about the church that is, it's so deeply destructive of itself. I would be really curious to know, like you said, I don't whether or not these people actually believe in anything, particularly
Well,
the
I know,
clergy. But I would be curious to see a survey, to ask them certain questions on key theological subjects,
Well,
to find out
actually-
actually what the clergy really do believe, because it seems that what they believe in is this new ideology,
Yeah, they
progressive
do.
ideology, above and beyond anything that comes from Christian
Well,
doctrine. They
all-
might even be ignorant of it.
All we have to do on this programme, at this channel, and our viewers, is look at the way the church treats Calvin Robinson, you know, who is actually a Christian and who thinks in a fundamentally Christian way, and to the established church, to the Church of England, he's reprehensible.
Also, the other thing is absolutely two things I'd say. First of all, you know, they do not like people like us.
No.
You know, I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, you know, during the Brexit referendum campaign, you know, I mean, there were cases of people I knew who were just having to put up with, for example, this rampant, you know, anti-Brexit stuff coming out of the church in their Sunday services, you know, and they do not like they are left wing. They do not like conservative people. They do not like people who don't go along with the woke agenda. I think that's the case. And secondly, they absolutely pin their colours to the mast, I think, when with their behaviour during the lockdown.
Yeah.
And the very thing they should do, which is to give spiritual sustenance to people, like people used to go in the churches during the Blitz in London, right, or in any other city for that matter. They would go there not because the church was going to give them any more protection than any other building, but obviously it was a spiritual kind of protection too. Totally, they closed them all down. They got rid of their evensong choirs. The whole thing, you know. So I mean, I
And a
think
church that I used to attend continued to do its online midnight mass. You can't do mass online, but its online midnight mass at Christmas did that after the pandemic with no good reason whatsoever. So there's even this sense of, in some places, and of course there are many fantastic clergy and many good solid theologians within the church still, but there's this sense that amongst some clergy they view the project of the church, if to call it that, they view it as something other than how we would traditionally understand the church, and they don't recognize the meaning of, say, the importance of physically receiving communion. They don't recognize that as being something that needs to be done in person within a congregation rather than over the internet.
And it's part of our tradition, and it's I think for them it's a representation of the West that they hate, you know. And it's like you say, yes, there will be some wonderful clergy, just as there are some wonderful journalists, just as there are some wonderful teachers and lecturers, but actually the institution itself is completely and utterly captured.
So to finish on a
lighter
positive
note.
note, a lighter note, Fawlty Towers is making a comeback, and particularly interesting given that the BBC in 2020 got rid of that famous episode with the goose stepping because it apparently had racial slurs in it. It was then investigated, they reinstated the episode, but when they reinstated they put on an offensive content warning. So it's interesting that they've now decided to do this remake. I wonder whether they're going to attempt to tell John Cleese what he is and isn't allowed to write.
Well, I think it'll be a case of don't mention the culture war, won't it? That
would be a very good idea if John Cleese is watching.
I can't quite see how this would pan out, really. Can you?
No.
I mean, it was very much of its time. I'll be honest with you, I never quite got the thing with Fawlty Towers. Everyone thinks it's
I love it.
The greatest sitcom ever. Never quite got. But what is it without Manuel, for example? You couldn't have Manuel now, because that would be a shocking stereotype of a Spanish waiter, wouldn't it?
I actually do. A friend of this channel, Gareth Roberts, tweeted today, the writer, the journalist Gareth Roberts, he said they're in talks, which means it won't. That just means there'll be a few big dinners, a few big lunches, lots of conversation, and it probably won't happen. So I'm sceptical as to whether it will happen, but I'm with you on that. I can't see how it will work. I mean, there are some obvious targets that could be extremely funny, but they won't touch them with the barge pole.
Yes, exactly.
So I think it will be. I'm sad to say, I think it'll be a real embarrassment if it.
But no Sybil, no Polly,
no
Manuel.
They were types that just aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
You know, the lady with the shampoo,
the
and
general,
set, the general, the
two
Joan
ladies,
Hicks character,
the
the very sort of no nonsense older English woman. And basically
that's Torquay, madam.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Even the establishment itself does that exist in that way? Kind of boarding house stroke hotel, isn't it?
Well,
the whole structure of society that makes it work doesn't exist anymore.
Just isn't there, and you know what it's going to be. It's going to be a generational thing, between him and his daughter, basically, and him not being able to get along with all of this new stuff.
Yes.
And I kind of think, oh no, really? Leave it.
So you're not looking forward to it?
I'd be surprised if it happens, actually. I'd be surprised if it happens.
Would you watch it? You didn't like the old.
You didn't like it the first time round.
Yeah.
Not really, no. I don't like slapstick, and there was a lot of slapstick.
I do.
I don't mean to be a bore, but no, I would watch it to see how it was done. But I'm more interested to see him on his new GB News show.
Yeah, I think
which is definitely happening.
And it is definitely happening.
Or at least
that's with Andrew Doyle as well. Andrew Doyle's involved with that in some way, isn't he? I think so. Yeah. What I would be really interested in, actually, what viewers think of the Fawlty Towers thing, and what viewers scenarios that viewers would think would for Basil Fawlty to be involved in new kinds of scenarios.
Actually, yes. There's one interesting thing actually. Just before we go, is that there was a report came out this week. Someone's done a report on this, saying that British people feel that they are actually laughing less and less. Did you see this?
Yes.
No, I didn't see it.
We're in a chuckle crisis.
Yes. Yeah. They're actually laughing less, and they don't.
Who'd have thought? Never.
Yeah. They don't know where to actually look if they want to laugh.
Yeah.
There was this thing about people actually looking at Only Fools and Horses during the pandemic, for example. That I heard a lot about that. We even had John O'Sullivan on recently, of all people, talking about that very thing and loving that. But I think it is actually true. You don't hear laughter. Actually, I mean,
do you think though that may be because, and I know we have to wrap up, but that maybe that's because people are not spending time together in the way they used to. So people are so atomized now that though we do come together in social settings, that you don't have the same kind of free social atmosphere that maybe you once had.
The joy has been ripped out of life.
I think it's actually that people are frightened of laughing at things because people are frightened of being offensive.
Yeah.
And humour, great humour, is supposed to be offensive, isn't it? You're supposed to push the.
But people can't feel safe enough in a social setting to just let themselves go and be funny and laugh and because there's a sort of liberation to. But anyway, on that note, the joy's been taken out of life, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Philip. And thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment below. Let us know what you think. And we will see you next time on Newspeak.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.